My name is Diana, and looking back, I should have known better than to believe that my sister's invitation was an olive branch rather than a trap. I learned the hard way that blood doesn't mean a thing when it's filtered through a designer champagne flute. The drive to Cynthia's estate in Greenwich had taken us 3 hours. 3 hours of the highway wind whistling through the slight gap in my SUV's passenger window. 3 hours of Lily humming a song she'd learned in third-grade choir, her small fingers tracing the patterns on her denim jacket. 3 hours of my own heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs, hoping, praying, that this time being family would finally be enough. I had dressed with a quiet resolve, choosing a tailored charcoal blazer and the sensible leather boots I'd bought with my first real paycheck. My hair was pulled back into a tight, professional knot, a habit from years of boardroom battles that I couldn't quite shake, even for a Saturday afternoon. Lily was a vision of unpolished sunshine in a yellow sundress and white tights. Her hair tucked behind her ears with the glittery butterfly clips she'd spent 20 minutes picking out. She looked like exactly what she was. A happy 7-year-old girl who believed that a party was simply a place where people were kind to one another. We looked like a postcard for a life well lived but modestly earned. A stark contrast to the world we entered the moment my tires crunched onto the pristine white gravel of Cynthia's driveway. The mansion loomed over us, a sprawling monument of glass and cold stone that didn't just welcome guests, it audited them. The pristine white gravel of the driveway crunched beneath the tires of my SUV, a sound that felt unexpectedly loud in the heavy, manicured silence of the estate. As I put the car in park, I could see a line of valets dressed in sharp black uniforms, standing like sentries before a phalanx of Italian sports cars and German SUVs that shimmered under the late afternoon sun. They moved with a practiced, robotic grace, but as we approached the front of the line, the rhythm faltered. A young man with slicked back hair and a jawline that looked carved from the same cold marble as the mansion stepped forward. He didn't offer a smile. Instead, his eyes performed a slow, clinical sweep of our vehicle, lingering on the roof rack and the slightly faded paint on the door handles. It wasn't just a look. It was a tally of our perceived net worth, and I could see the moment he decided we had failed the audit. "The service entrance is around the back, through the gate with the stone ivy," he said, his voice dropping into a tone of bored authority. He didn't even reach for the door handle. I felt a sharp prickle of heat rise up my neck. Beside me, I saw Lily's small hand tighten around her stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide as she looked up at the towering white columns of her aunt's house. "We aren't the caterers," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. "I'm Cynthia's sister, Jana. We're here for the gala." The valet's eyebrows twitched upward, a flicker of surprise quickly replaced by a thin, practiced mask of apology that didn't reach his eyes. He exchanged a knowing glance with another staff member, a silent communication that spoke volumes about the type of relative Cynthia must have kept hidden away. "My apologies, ma'am," he said, though the word ma'am felt like a heavy, sarcastic weight. He opened the door, but he held it at an angle that felt defensive, as if he were trying to prevent the budget atmosphere of my car from leaking out onto the pristine driveway. As I stepped out, I adjusted my blazer, feeling the weight of the boardroom knot in my hair. I reached back to help Lily, whose white tights looked blindingly bright against the dark asphalt. Another staff member, a woman holding a digital tablet, approached us with a stride that suggested she was measuring the value of my sensible leather boots with every step. She didn't look at my face. She looked at the lack of a designer logo on my bag. "Name?" she asked, her stylus hovering over the screen like a weapon. "Diana Foster. And my daughter Lily." She scrolled for a long moment, the silence stretching out until it became a physical barrier. "Right. The sister," she murmured, her voice trailing off with a faint, condescending lilt. She gestured toward the massive oak doors without looking up. "You can head inside. Though perhaps leave the toy in the car. It doesn't quite suit the aesthetic of the Great Hall." Lily looked down at her rabbit, then up at me, the first shadow of doubt clouding her bright expression. I squeezed her hand, pulling her close. "The rabbit stays," I said firmly. We began the long walk toward the entrance, two figures in simple cotton and leather, moving through a world of silk and gold that was already trying to push us back out. The heavy oak doors swung open, releasing a wave of chilled, scent-drenched air that smelled of expensive lilies and floor wax. Inside, the great hall was a cathedral of excess, with crystal chandeliers dripping light onto a sea of guests who moved with the rehearsed elegance of a choreographed ballet. I held Lily's hand tightly as we navigated the perimeter, our reflection caught in the gilded mirrors that lined the walls, making us look like two small, dark ink blots on a canvas of gold leaf. Cynthia appeared from a cluster of men in tailored tuxedos, gliding toward us with a smile that was perfectly symmetrical and entirely hollow. She was draped in a gown of midnight blue silk that probably cost more than my first 2 years of mortgage payments. She didn't hug me. She reached out and squeezed my forearms, a gesture that kept me at a literal and figurative arm's length. "Diana, you made it," she said, her voice pitched for the benefit of the nearby guests. "And look at little Lily. So adventurous with her accessories." Her eyes flicked toward the stuffed rabbit and the butterfly clips with a look of practiced pity. "I was beginning to worry the GPS wouldn't be able to find us all the way from your little corner of the world." "The drive was fine, Cynthia," I replied, keeping my voice level. "The house is impressive. It's a home, really. Just a simple place for friends," she sighed, though her gaze was already wandering toward a silver tray being carried past us. Suddenly, she snapped her fingers, and a young woman in a blazer appeared instantly, holding a velvet-lined box. "Oh, before I forget, we're doing things a bit differently this year to keep the flow organized. For the children's activities, you know." Cynthia reached into the box and pulled out a strip of plastic. It wasn't the shimmering holographic gold band I saw encircling the wrists of the children running toward the indoor carousel. It was a flat, dull gray, the color of wet pavement. Before I could ask, Cynthia took Lily's small wrist and snapped the band shut. "There we go," Cynthia chirped, patting Lily's hand. "This is for the Tier 2 group. It gives her access to the garden terrace and the craft room. The gold bands are for for the primary sponsor's children. They have a very specific curriculum today involving the equestrian show and the digital lab. We wouldn't want Lily to feel overwhelmed by things she isn't used to, would we?" I looked down at the gray plastic cutting into the soft skin of my daughter's wrist. It was a brand, a visible marker of the fringe status Cynthia had assigned us. Lily looked at her own wrist, then at a passing girl whose gold band sparkled like a piece of jewelry. "Does this mean I can't go on the horses with the others?" Lily whispered, her voice small and wavering. Cynthia didn't even look at her. She was already adjusting her own diamond bracelet. "There are wonderful coloring books in the craft room, darling. Much safer. Now, Diana, be a dear and find your table. It's through the gallery, past the main dining hall, near the west veranda. It's lovely and quiet there, away from all the noise." She gave my shoulder a final condescending pat and vanished back into the crowd, leaving us standing under the weight of a chandelier that felt like it was hanging by a single fraying thread. The gallery was a long, echoing corridor of minimalist art and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a pool reflecting the twilight like a sheet of liquid sapphire. As we made our way toward the west veranda, the quiet area Cynthia had suggested, we crossed paths with her again. This time she wasn't alone. She was the center of a tight orbit of 3 women, all of whom looked like they had been curated by the same high-end plastic surgeon and dressed by the same boutique on Madison Avenue. "Oh, girls, you simply must meet my sister Diana," Cynthia said, her voice dropping into that sugary performative tone I had learned to dread. She didn't wait for me to reach them. She beckoned us over like we were interesting artifacts she'd found at a flea market. The women turned in unison, their eyes performing the same lightning-fast audit the valet had conducted earlier. I felt the weight of my charcoal blazer, a piece that had always made me feel powerful in a boardroom, suddenly feel heavy and utilitarian against their gossamer thin silks. "Diana is the practical one in the family," Cynthia continued, resting a manicured hand on my shoulder. The diamonds on her fingers caught the light, sparkling with a cold, hard brilliance. "She's always been so disciplined. Even when we were girls, she'd save her allowance while I was busy living. And clearly, she hasn't changed a bit. One of the women, a blonde with a necklace of emeralds that looked like frozen droplets of seawater, tilted her head. It's so refreshing to see someone who doesn't obsess over labels. That blazer. It looks so durable. Cynthia let out a soft, tittering laugh that felt like a spray of ice water. Doesn't it? It's what I call her charming frugal look. She's mastered the art of the hand-me-down aesthetic. I tell her all the time, Diana, you don't have to live like a martyr, but she just insists on being so grounded. She probably found that lovely little sundress Lily is wearing at a community swap. It's so important to teach children about limitations, don't you think? I felt Lily's hand twitch in mine. She wasn't looking at the art anymore. She was looking at her own reflection in the glass, her brow furrowed as she processed the word limitations. The sting wasn't just in the words, but in the way Cynthia used frugal as a polite synonym for failing. To these women, I wasn't a successful woman who chose substance over show. I was a charity case they could use to feel better about their own excess. We value quality that lasts, Cynthia, I said, my voice low and dangerously calm. Not everything of worth comes with a signature on the tag. Of course, darling, Cynthia said, her eyes already scanning the room for someone more important. That's exactly what people say when they've settled. Now do run along to the veranda. I think they're serving the basic refreshments there soon. You'll be much more comfortable. As they moved away, their laughter trailed behind them like a bad scent. Lily looked up at me, the glittery butterfly clips in her hair suddenly looking fragile. Mommy, is my dress not a good one? It's perfect, Lily, I whispered, though the boardroom knot in my hair felt tighter than ever. The dress is perfect. Some people just don't know how to look at things correctly. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 4, where Lily faces the reality of the gilded cage? The west veranda was as quiet as Cynthia had promised, mostly because it was isolated from the heart of the celebration. The air here was still, lacking the vibrant energy of the music and laughter that drifted from the center of the estate. Lily's eyes, however, remained fixed on the diamond pavilion, a spectacular glass-walled structure erected on the central lawn. Inside, we could see children soaring on a white and gold carousel and interactive screens glowing with light. It looked like a fairyland, and to a 7-year-old it was irresistible. Can I just see, Mommy? Lily asked, her voice hovering between hope and hesitation. Just to look at the horses. I looked at the dull gray band on her wrist and felt a heavy knot of dread in my stomach, but I nodded. We walked toward the pavilion, the grass plush and perfectly manicured beneath our feet. As we reached the entrance, Lily's pace quickened, her face lighting up at the sight of a mechanical unicorn that seemed to shimmer with real moonlight. But before she could reach the threshold, a woman in a crisp, gray uniform stepped into our path. She was a professional nanny, her face a mask of polite but immovable authority. She didn't look at Lily's face. Her eyes went straight to the gray plastic on my daughter's wrist. "I'm sorry," the woman said, her voice as cool and clinical as the air conditioning. "This area is reserved for the gold-tier guests only." Lily stopped mid-stride, her hand reaching out as if she could still touch the magic inside. "I just wanted to see the unicorn," she whispered. "The guest list is very specific," the nanny replied, stepping slightly to the left to physically block Lily's view as 2 other children, decked in designer labels and glittering gold wristbands, sauntered past us without a second glance. The hostess was very clear about the tiers. "The craft room on the terrace has some lovely coloring pages for the Grey group." "She's the hostess's niece," I said, my voice dropping an octave, the tone I usually reserved for the most difficult negotiations at the firm. "I'm sure an exception can be made for her to look at a carousel." The woman didn't flinch. She simply pointed to a small laminated sign near the door. "Instructions from Mrs. Sterling herself. Tier 2 is not permitted entry to the pavilion. It's a matter of capacity and curated experience." Curated experience. The words felt like a slap. I watched the light die out of Lily's eyes as she realized the invisible wall between her and the other children wasn't just a mistake. It was a design. She pulled her stuffed rabbit tighter against her chest, the gray band on her wrist looking like a shackle against the bright yellow of her dress. She didn't argue, she didn't cry. She just stepped back, shrinking into herself in a way that made my heart shatter. "It's okay, Mommy," she said, her voice thick with a maturity no 7-year-old should possess. "I don't really like unicorns anyway." As we turned away, I looked back at the pavilion. It wasn't a playground. It was a cage designed to keep people like us out, and my sister was the one holding the key. My grip on Lily's hand tightened. The humble sister was fading, replaced by the woman who knew exactly how much Cynthia's curated world actually cost, and who was currently paying the bill. I found Lily in a small, shadowed alcove behind a row of oversized spiraled topiaries, far from the golden glow of the main pavilion. She was sitting on a stone bench that felt too big for her, her small frame curled inward, her face buried in the soft fur of her stuffed rabbit. The glittery butterfly clips had slipped, hanging precariously from her fine hair, and the sight of her shoulders heaving in silent rhythmic sobs hit me like a physical blow. "Lily, honey," I whispered, kneeling in the grass before her. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and brimming with a confusion that no 7-year-old should have to navigate. "Mommy, is it because we're poor?" she asked, her voice trembling. "The girl with the gold band said I couldn't play because this party is only for the rich kids. She said Auntie Cynthia told her so." The air in my lungs turned to ice. Before I could find the words to stitch her heart back together, voices drifted over the manicured hedge from the champagne bar on the other side. They were sharp, melodic, and unmistakable. "Cynthia, really, the gray wristbands were a stroke of genius," a woman laughed. I recognized the voice, the blonde with the emeralds. "It keeps the aesthetics so clean. But isn't it awkward having your sister here? She looks so out of place, like she wandered in from a bake sale." "It's a nightmare, darling, believe me," Cynthia's voice rang out, brittle and condescending. "But what was I supposed to do? She's family. I had to invite her, even if she insists on living that authentic life in a house that's probably falling apart. I told the staff to keep the children separate for a reason. This party is for rich kids only. It's about networking even at their age. I can't have Lily dragging down the tone of the Diamond Pavilion. Can you imagine her in the digital lab? She wouldn't know what to do with herself. It's kinder this way, really. Keep them in their own lane so they don't get ideas above their station." I sat perfectly still, my hand resting on Lily's knee, feeling the heat of a cold, calculated rage radiating from my center. This wasn't just a social snub. It was a deliberate act of cruelty against a child whose only crime was having a mother who didn't feel the need to perform for an audience. "Mommy," Lily whispered, seeing the change in my expression. I stood up, smoothing the front of my charcoal blazer, the boardroom knot in my hair suddenly feeling like a crown. I wasn't the quiet sister anymore. I was the woman who held the keys to the very kingdom Cynthia was using to lock us out. "Dry your eyes, Lily," I said, my voice as hard and clear as a diamond. "We're going to go say goodbye to your auntie." I stepped out from behind the topiaries, my hand resting gently but firmly on Lily's shoulder. The movement was fluid, intentional, and devoid of the hesitant posture I had maintained since arriving. As we rounded the hedge, the circle of women didn't notice us immediately. They were too busy admiring the way the light caught the bubbles in their crystal flutes. Cynthia was mid-laugh, her head tilted back to expose the diamond necklace that pulsed with stolen light. "It really is about the company you keep," Cynthia was saying, her voice a sharp serrated edge of self-importance. "You can't just let anyone into the inner circle without." She stopped. The laughter died in her throat as her eyes met mine. I didn't stop until I was standing directly in front of her, occupying the center of their carefully curated space. The blonde woman in emeralds took a reflexive step back, sensing a shift in the air that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. The atmosphere didn't just cool, it went bone-dry and silent, the kind of stillness that precedes a massive tectonic shift. "Diana," Cynthia said, her voice wavering for a fraction of a second before the mask of condescension snapped back into place. "I thought you were at the west veranda. Did you lose your way?" The signage for the Tier 2 guests was quite clear. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, seeing past the silk and the cosmetic perfection to the hollow insecurity that drove her to brand a 7-year-old child with a gray plastic strip. I didn't look like a charming frugal martyr anymore. I looked like the woman who had spent 15 years turning a boutique investment firm into a silent titan of the industry. "I didn't lose my way, Cynthia," I said, my voice low and carrying a resonance that silenced the clinking of glasses at the nearby bar. "I found it. I was just busy explaining to Lily why her aunt thinks a curated experience involves teaching children how to be cruel before they can even spell the word." Cynthia's face flushed a blotchy, panicked red. "Now, Diana, don't be dramatic. It's a party. There are standards, and if you can't appreciate the effort it takes to maintain them—" "Standards?" I interrupted, a small, cold smile touching my lips. "Is that what you call this? Borrowed elegance built on a foundation of sand?" I reached out and touched the sleeve of her midnight blue silk gown, not with envy, but with the detached air of an auditor. "You talk a lot about rich kids and lanes, Cynthia. But you've forgotten the most basic rule of the high-stakes world you're trying so hard to pretend you own." The women in the circle exchanged uneasy glances. They were social predators, and they could smell that the hierarchy in the room had just been inverted. Cynthia opened her mouth to snap a retort, but the words withered. For the first time in our lives, she was looking at me and seeing someone she didn't recognize. The woman who didn't just belong in the room, but the one who could buy the building. "What rule is that?" Cynthia whispered, her bravado failing her. "Never insult the person who signs your husband's paychecks," I said. Cynthia's face went a ghostly shade of white, the kind of pale that no amount of expensive foundation could mask. A nervous, fluttery laugh escaped her lips, but it died the moment she looked into my eyes and saw the absolute absence of a joke. Her friends stood frozen, their champagne flutes hovering like glass monuments to their own sudden irrelevance. "What are you talking about, Diana?" Cynthia hissed, stepping closer to try and keep the conversation private, though it was already too late. "Marcus works for a global private equity firm. He doesn't have his paychecks signed by a Vermont housewife. He works for Sterling Vance Tech," I said, my voice cutting through the humid evening air with surgical precision. "Or at least he did. Until their R&D department hemorrhaged $40 million last quarter, and the board was forced to seek an emergency infusion of capital to avoid a public collapse. They were desperate, Cynthia. They were days away from losing this house, the cars, and the very silk you're wearing." I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out my phone, tapping the screen a few times before turning it toward her. On the screen was a digitized copy of a signature page, a document I had reviewed a dozen times in my study back home. "The bailout came from a silent partner," I continued, the quiet storm finally breaking. "A firm called Aegis Holdings. It's an anonymous trust one founded 10 years ago. If you look at the bottom left, under the primary investor's signature, you'll recognize the handwriting. It's the same hand that used to write you birthday cards when we were kids." Cynthia leaned in, her eyes darting across the legal jargon, landing on the name Diana Foster scrawled in black ink next to the Aegis seal. She gasped, a sharp, ragged sound that made the woman in emeralds wince. "Marcus told me it was a venture capital group from the city," she whispered, her hand starting to shake so violently that a drop of champagne spilled onto her midnight blue gown. "I am the venture capital group, Cynthia. I'm the anonymous angel who saved Marcus from a fraud investigation and kept your lifestyle on life support. I did it because he's family, and despite everything I thought family meant something. But while I was signing the papers to keep your daughter in her private school, you were busy ordering gray plastic wristbands to make sure mine knew she wasn't rich enough to ride your carousel." The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the distant, mocking sound of the carousel music from the Diamond Pavilion. The power shift was complete. The charming frugal sister had just revealed she owned the bank, and Cynthia was left standing in the wreckage of a superiority that had never actually existed. The silence was absolute, a vacuum that sucked the air out of the manicured terrace. Cynthia reached out, her fingers trembling as if she wanted to touch the screen of my phone but was terrified of the truth it held. The women in her circle had begun to drift away, moving with the quiet, predatory instinct of socialites who knew when a ship was sinking. "Diana, please," Cynthia whispered, her voice cracking. "Marcus. He didn't tell me. He just said the firm was restructuring. If I had known it was you. If you had known it was me, you would have treated my daughter with basic human decency." I cut her off, my voice devoid of heat, replaced by a cold, professional finality. "That's the problem, Cynthia. Respect shouldn't be a transaction based on a bank balance. It should be the baseline for how you treat your own blood." I looked down at the gray plastic band on Lily's wrist. It was a small thing, a strip of cheap rubbish, but it represented a world of cruelty that I was no longer willing to subsidize. "The Aegis investment contract has a very specific set of moral and ethical stipulations," I continued, stepping into the space she was trying to defend. "A breach of character clause. It's designed to protect the firm's reputation from being associated with toxic leadership or public scandal. Today, I saw exactly what kind of character this house is built on." Cynthia's eyes went wide. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that, as of 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, Aegis Holdings is exercising its right to withdraw the emergency funding. We are calling the loan in full." "You can't do that," she gasped, her hands flying to her throat, clutching the diamonds I now knew I had paid for. "That would bankrupt Marcus. It would take everything. This house, the gala, the business. It would all be gone by the end of the month." "Then I suggest you start packing," I said, my voice as steady as the mountain air back home. "I spent years building my life on substance and hard work, while you spent years building yours on the backs of people you deemed lesser than you. You wanted a party for rich kids only, Cynthia. Well, tomorrow, you're going to find out exactly how it feels to have nothing but the clothes on your back." Lily looked up at me, sensing the tectonic shift. I didn't feel the triumph I expected. I only felt a deep, hollow sadness for the sister I had lost to vanity. Cynthia reached for my arm, her manicured nails digging into my blazer, but I stepped back, breaking the connection for good. "The audit is over, Cynthia," I said. "And you failed." I reached down and unclipped the gray plastic band from Lily's wrist, letting it fall onto the pristine white gravel where it looked like nothing more than the piece of trash it was. We didn't wait for a goodbye from the staff or a final look from the guests. We simply walked back to our SUV, our footsteps steady and synchronized. Behind us, the mansion remained illuminated, a sprawling glass palace that now felt strangely hollow, as if the revelation of the truth had sucked the life out of its gilded halls. As I pulled out of the driveway, the crunch of the gravel eventually gave way to the smooth hum of the asphalt. The silence in the car was heavy for a moment, filled with the lingering echo of Cynthia's panicked breathing and the sharp scent of those expensive, suffocating lilies. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw Lily staring out the window, her hand still resting on her stuffed rabbit. "Mommy," she asked quietly, her voice small but no longer trembling, "was the Diamond Pavilion really the best place in the world?" I merged onto the highway, the lights of Greenwich fading into a blur of distant gold in the mirror. "You want to know a secret, Lily?" I asked, catching her eye in the reflection. "That pavilion wasn't a magic world. It was just a room. And the funny thing about people like Auntie Cynthia is that they spend so much time building walls to keep people out that they end up living in the smallest rooms of all." Lily tilted her head, considering this. "But it had a unicorn. It had a machine that looked like a unicorn," I corrected gently. "But back home we have the whole meadow behind the barn. We have the woods where the real deer run and the pond where the frogs sing all night. Auntie Cynthia's area was just a gilded cage. It was small because it was only built for people who think they're better than everyone else. Our world. It's as big as we want it to be because we don't have to ask anyone for a wristband to enjoy it." Lily leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, a small, thoughtful smile finally touching her lips. I think I like our meadow better. It doesn't have a fence. Exactly, I said, reaching over to pat her knee. As we drove north toward Vermont, the air coming through the vents began to smell of pine and damp earth, the scent of something real. The boardroom knot in my hair finally felt loose, and the weight I'd been carrying since the first 3 hours of the drive was gone. I hadn't won because I had the money to break my sister's world. I had won because I had the clarity to walk away from it. We were heading home to a house that didn't need a guest list, to a life where the only gold that mattered was the light of the sunrise over our own hills. Under the vast, open sky, we weren't tier 2 or tier 1. We were just us, and that was more than enough. Please don't forget to subscribe.